The cold February rain drummed against the windows of the modest single-story home on Oakcrest Street in Shelby, North Carolina, as 9-year-old Asha Degree settled into bed beside her younger brother O'Brien on the night of February 13th, 2000. The power had flickered out earlier that evening due to a car accident that knocked down a utility pole nearby, plunging the quiet residential neighborhood into darkness. But by midnight, the electricity had returned, casting familiar shadows across the children's shared bedroom where basketball trophies gleamed on wooden shelves and homework assignments lay neatly stacked on a small desk. Harold Degree, a devoted father who worked long hours to provide for his family, made his routine check on his children around 12:30 in the morning, peering through the doorway to see both Asha and O'Brien sleeping peacefully in their beds. The house felt secure, warm, and filled with the quiet contentment that comes from a family bound together by love and routine. 2 hours later, at 2:30, Harold checked again, this time more carefully, ensuring his children were safe and sound as the storm continued to rage outside. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're following this story from. Your support helps us continue bringing you these important investigations that keep missing persons cases in the public eye. Neither Harold nor his wife Aquila could have imagined that within a few short hours their lives would be forever changed by a mystery that would baffle investigators, devastate a community, and leave a family searching for answers that remain elusive more than 2 decades later. At approximately 3:45 in the morning on February 14th, 2000, as rain continued to pour across the darkened highways of Cleveland County, truck driver Jeff Jackson was making his regular delivery route along Highway 18 between Shelby and Morganton. The 2-lane road stretched through rural countryside, past farmland and patches of dense forest, illuminated only by his headlights cutting through the stormy darkness. What he saw next would haunt him for years to come. Walking along the shoulder of the highway, completely alone and seemingly oblivious to the danger of her situation, was a small figure dressed in white clothing. As Jackson's truck approached, he could make out the form of a young girl wearing a white, long-sleeved shirt and white pants, her dark hair plastered against her head by the relentless rain. She appeared to be carrying something, possibly a backpack, and was walking steadily northward along the treacherous roadway. Jackson wasn't the only witness that night. Approximately 30 minutes later, another motorist, Robert Williams, was driving the same stretch of highway when he too spotted the mysterious child. Concerned for her safety and bewildered by the sight of a young girl walking alone in such terrible weather conditions, Williams made a decision that would become one of the most haunting aspects of this case. He turned his vehicle around and drove back toward the child, intending to offer help or at least ensure she was safe. But as Williams approached with his headlights illuminating the roadway ahead, something extraordinary happened. The moment the girl realized a vehicle was approaching her, she turned and ran directly into the dense woods that bordered the highway. Williams watched in shock as the small figure disappeared completely into the darkness of the forest, vanishing as if she had never been there at all. The rain continued to fall, washing away any footprints or traces of her presence, leaving only questions that would multiply with each passing hour. Neither Jackson nor Williams initially reported what they had seen. It wasn't until later that day, when news of a missing child began to spread throughout the community, that both men contacted the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office to report their disturbing encounters with the lone figure on Highway 18. Meanwhile, back on Oakcrest Street, the Degree family was beginning what would become the longest day of their lives. At approximately 5:45 in the morning, Aquila Degree rose from bed to begin her usual morning routine. The children hadn't taken their baths the previous evening due to the power outage, so she planned to get them washed and ready for school earlier than usual. She walked down the hallway to their bedroom, expecting to find both children sleeping soundly as they had been during Harold's checks throughout the night. O'Brien was there, curled up in his bed, breathing peacefully in the early morning quiet. But Asha's bed was empty. The covers were pulled back, and there was no sign of the 9-year-old girl who had gone to sleep in that very spot just hours earlier. Ikila felt her heart skip as she checked the bathroom, thinking perhaps Asha had gotten up early and was washing up on her own. The bathroom was empty. She hurried through the rest of the small house, calling Asha's name softly at first, then with increasing urgency. The living room, kitchen, and every closet revealed nothing. Harold awoke to his wife's worried voice echoing through their home, and together they conducted a more thorough search. They checked under beds, behind furniture, in every conceivable hiding place where a child might be found. The reality began to sink in with each empty room they discovered. Harold's first thought was that Asha might have crossed the street to visit her grandmother's house, where she often spent time and felt completely comfortable. It wouldn't be entirely unusual for her to wake early and decide to visit, though she had never done so without permission. When they called the grandmother's house, however, the response confirmed their growing fears. Asha was not there, and no one had seen or heard from her. By 6:30 in the morning, with daylight beginning to filter through the storm clouds, Ikila made the phone call that would officially begin one of North Carolina's most perplexing missing persons cases. She contacted the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office to report that her 9-year-old daughter had vanished from their home sometime during the night. The initial response was swift and comprehensive. Sheriff Dan Crawford and his deputies arrived at the Degree home within minutes, immediately establishing the residence as a potential crime scene, while simultaneously beginning what would become one of the largest search operations in the county's history. The house was carefully examined for any signs of forced entry, struggle, or evidence that might explain Asha's disappearance. What investigators found was both reassuring and puzzling. There were no signs of a break-in, no indication that anyone had entered the home during the night, and no evidence of any kind of struggle or disturbance. The doors had been locked, the windows secure, and nothing appeared to be missing or out of place. Most significantly, several of Asha's belongings were gone, including her school backpack, some clothing, and a few personal items that suggested she had deliberately packed before leaving. O'Brien, questioned gently by investigators, provided the only potential clue about the timing of his sister's departure. The 7-year-old boy recalled hearing his sister's bed creaking during the night, sometime after their father's last check at 2:30. At the time, he had assumed she was simply changing positions in her sleep and had thought nothing of it. Now that sound took on an entirely different significance as investigators realized it might have been the moment Asha got up to gather her belongings and leave the house. The weather conditions on the night of Asha's disappearance added another layer of mystery to an already baffling case. Shelby had been experiencing severe thunderstorms with heavy rain, strong winds, and temperatures in the 40s. It was exactly the kind of night when most people, especially children, would want to stay indoors where it was warm and dry. The idea that a 9-year-old girl would voluntarily venture out into such conditions, particularly in the early hours of the morning, seemed almost inconceivable to investigators and family members alike. As news of Asha's disappearance spread throughout the community, hundreds of volunteers joined the search effort. The Shelby Police Department, Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and FBI all became involved in what quickly became a massive operation. Search teams with dogs combed through the neighborhoods surrounding the Degree home, while helicopters equipped with heat-sensing equipment scanned the rural areas where a child might seek shelter. The community response was overwhelming. Churches organized prayer vigils, local businesses donated food and supplies for search teams, and residents opened their homes to volunteers who had traveled from neighboring counties to help find Asha. Flyers with her photograph were posted on every available surface throughout Shelby and surrounding towns, while local media outlets broadcast her description around the clock. Asha was described as an African-American girl, 4 feet 6 inches tall, weighing approximately 60 pounds, with black hair and brown eyes. She had been wearing a white long-sleeved shirt and white pants when she disappeared, the same clothing description provided by the motorists who had seen her on Highway 18. The family confirmed that these were among the items missing from her dresser, along with her school backpack and several other personal belongings. The search efforts focused initially on the immediate area around the Degree home, expanding outward in concentric circles as hours passed without any sign of the missing girl. Bloodhounds were brought in to track any scent trail, but the heavy rain that had fallen throughout the night had washed away most traces that might have provided direction for the search teams. As the first full day of searching concluded without success, investigators began to piece together a timeline of events and develop their initial theories about what might have happened to Asha Degree. The window of opportunity for her disappearance had been narrowed to approximately 4 hours, between Harold's final check at 2:30 in the morning and Ikila's discovery of her absence at 5:45. The reports from the 2 motorists on Highway 18 provided the first concrete evidence of Asha's movements after leaving home. But they also raised disturbing new questions. If she had indeed been the girl seen walking along the highway, what had motivated her to leave the safety of her home and venture out into such dangerous conditions? And why had she run into the woods when someone tried to help her? Detective Joel Paget, who was assigned as the lead investigator on the case, found himself confronting a mystery unlike any he had encountered in his career. Every aspect of Asha's disappearance seemed to contradict what was known about her personality and behavior patterns. She was described by everyone who knew her as a quiet, obedient child who was afraid of the dark and would never disobey her parents by leaving the house without permission. Teachers at Burns Elementary School described Asha as an excellent student who was well-behaved and studious. She was in the 4th grade and consistently earned good grades while participating enthusiastically in school activities. Her favorite subject was reading, and she was known to be somewhat shy around strangers, but comfortable and outgoing with her family and close friends. Asha's involvement in youth basketball had been one of her greatest sources of joy and pride. She played for a local team and was considered one of the better players despite her young age. However, investigators learned that on the Saturday before her disappearance, February 12th, her team had suffered a disappointing loss in a game where Asha felt she had contributed to the defeat through her play. Some family members mentioned that she had been upset about the loss and worried that she had let her teammates down. This detail became one of the first potential motives investigators considered for Asha's disappearance. Could the disappointment from the basketball game have been significant enough to cause a 9-year-old to run away from home? Her parents insisted that while Asha had been disappointed, it wasn't the kind of setback that would drive her to such drastic action. She had experienced losses before and had always bounced back with the resilience typical of children her age. The investigation expanded to include interviews with every person who had contact with Asha in the days and weeks preceding her disappearance. Classmates, teachers, neighbors, church members, and extended family were all questioned about any changes in her behavior, any unusual conversations, or any signs that she might have been planning to leave home. What emerged from these interviews was a consistent portrait of a happy, well-adjusted child who showed no signs of the distress or secretive behavior that might precede a planned disappearance. Asterisk asterisk. Pastor *** of the family's church, where the Degrees were active members, confirmed that Asha had attended services regularly and seemed her normal, cheerful self in the weeks before she vanished. The physical evidence from Asha's bedroom provided additional puzzles for investigators to solve. While several items of clothing and her school backpack were missing, the selection seemed somewhat random. Some favorite outfits remained in her dresser, while less preferred clothing was gone. Her backpack had contained school supplies, but investigators couldn't determine if she had taken any food, money, or other items that might sustain her during an extended absence. One detail that particularly intrigued investigators was the methodical way her belongings appeared to have been packed. This wasn't the hasty grabbing of items by a frightened child fleeing danger, but rather the deliberate selection of specific belongings by someone who had taken time to choose what to bring. This suggested either careful planning on Asha's part or the influence of someone who had convinced her to prepare for the journey. As the second day of searching began, the weather had cleared, allowing for more extensive ground searches of the rural areas surrounding Shelby. Horse-mounted search teams joined the effort, covering terrain that was difficult for vehicles to access, while all-terrain vehicles were used to search logging roads and farm paths throughout Cleveland County. The search area was expanded to include Kings Mountain State Park and other locations, where a child might seek shelter or hide. Abandoned buildings, barns, sheds, and any structure that could provide protection from the elements were systematically checked and rechecked. The Broad River and other bodies of water in the area were searched by dive teams, though there was no evidence to suggest that Asha's disappearance was connected to drowning. FBI profilers were brought in to analyze the case and develop a psychological profile of what might have motivated Asha's disappearance. Their initial assessment supported the family's contention that this was not typical runaway behavior. The profilers noted that children Asha's age rarely plan and execute successful escapes from their homes, particularly under such challenging weather conditions and during the darkest hours of the night. The profile suggested several possible scenarios. Asha might have been lured away by someone she trusted. She might have been responding to some perceived emergency that required her to leave immediately, or she might have been following instructions given to her by someone who had convinced her that leaving home was necessary for some reason she understood to be legitimate. This last possibility was particularly troubling to investigators, as it suggested the involvement of an adult who had groomed Asha for abduction over a period of time. Such cases typically involved someone with regular access to the child, someone who had gained her trust and could convince her to cooperate with what she might not have understood was a dangerous situation. Community meetings were held at local schools and churches, where investigators appealed for information from anyone who might have noticed unusual activity in the days before Asha's disappearance. They were particularly interested in reports of strangers in the neighborhood, unfamiliar vehicles, or any attempts by adults to engage children in conversation at parks, schools, or other public places. The response from the community was overwhelming, with hundreds of tips flowing into the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office. Each lead was carefully investigated, from reports of suspicious vehicles to claims of sightings of Asha in locations throughout North Carolina and neighboring states. However, none of these early tips produced any concrete evidence or viable leads that advanced the investigation. As the first week of the search concluded, the case had attracted national media attention. Television news crews from across the Southeast descended on Shelby, broadcasting the story of the missing 9-year-old to audiences throughout the United States. America's Most Wanted featured Asha's case, generating additional tips and keeping her photograph in front of millions of viewers. Harold and Asha Degree, found themselves thrust into the spotlight, making emotional appeals for their daughter's safe return during press conferences and television interviews. Their pain was evident to everyone who saw them, and their desperate pleas resonated with parents across the country who could imagine the horror of losing a child under such mysterious circumstances. "We just want our baby to come home," Asha said during one particularly heartbreaking press conference, her voice breaking as she spoke directly to the camera. "Asha, if you can hear this, we love you so much, and we're not angry. We just want you to come home to us." These words would be repeated countless times over the years, becoming a mantra of hope for a family that refused to give up belief that their daughter might still be alive somewhere. The investigation took on new urgency when the reports from the Highway 18 witnesses were officially confirmed and released to the public. The fact that Asha had been seen walking along the dangerous roadway in the early morning hours of February 14th meant that she had indeed left home voluntarily and had traveled approximately 1.5 miles from her house to the location where she was spotted. This revelation raised new questions about her destination and purpose. Highway 18 stretched for miles in both directions, connecting Shelby to smaller communities and rural areas throughout the region. If Asha had been walking along this road, she might have been heading toward any number of destinations, or she might have been planning to meet someone who was supposed to pick her up at a predetermined location. The fact that she had fled into the woods when the concerned motorist approached her suggested either that she was frightened of strangers in general, or that she had been specifically warned not to accept help from anyone she didn't know. This behavior was consistent with safety lessons taught to children, but it was also consistent with instructions that might be given by someone planning to abduct her. Search teams intensified their efforts in the wooded areas along Highway 18, particularly focusing on the location where Asha had been seen disappearing into the forest. The terrain in this area was challenging, with dense undergrowth, steep ravines, and numerous streams and creeks that could pose dangers to a child traveling alone in the dark. Tracking dogs were brought back to the scene multiple times, and while they were able to pick up scent trails in various locations, the passage of time and continued rainfall had degraded most traces to the point where they could not be followed reliably. The search area along the highway was expanded to cover several miles in both directions, with particular attention paid to any structures or landmarks that might have served as Asha's destination. On February 15th, the day after Asha's disappearance, searchers made their first significant discovery. In a storage shed located approximately 1/2 mile from where she had been seen on Highway 18, investigators found several items that were quickly identified as belonging to the missing girl. Candy wrappers and a hair bow that her family confirmed was Asha's were discovered inside the small structure, which appeared to have provided temporary shelter from the storm. The discovery of these items confirmed that Asha had indeed been in the area and had sought refuge in the shed at some point during her journey. Forensic technicians carefully processed the scene, collecting any evidence that might provide clues about what had happened to her after she left this location. The shed was located on private property belonging to a local family, who confirmed they had not given anyone permission to use the structure and had not seen or heard anything unusual on the night of Asha's disappearance. Footprints and other physical evidence found around the shed suggested that Asha had been there alone, at least initially. However, investigators could not determine how long she had remained in the shed or what had caused her to leave and continue her journey. The presence of candy wrappers suggested she had food with her, supporting the theory that she had planned her departure and had brought supplies for the trip. This discovery provided the first concrete evidence of Asha's movements after leaving home, but it also raised new questions about her ultimate destination and the identity of anyone who might have been helping or pursuing her. The shed was located along a route that could lead to numerous destinations, and investigators began the painstaking process of mapping all possible paths she might have taken from that point. Local residents in the area around the shed were re-interviewed, with investigators asking specifically about any unusual activity, vehicles or strangers noticed in the days before or after Asha's disappearance. Several people reported seeing unfamiliar cars parked along rural roads in the area, but none of these reports could be definitively connected to the case. The investigation expanded to include a thorough examination of sex offenders and other individuals with criminal histories who lived or worked in the area around Highway 18. Background checks were conducted on anyone who had access to the shed or the surrounding property, and polygraph tests were administered to family members and close associates to eliminate them as suspects and focus the investigation on external threats. As February turned to March, the case began to receive national attention from organizations specializing in missing children cases. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created age-progressed images showing what Asha might look like as she grew older, and these images were distributed widely in hopes that someone might recognize her if she was being held somewhere against her will. Reward money for information leading to Asha's safe return grew to substantial amounts as local businesses, civic organizations, and concerned citizens contributed to the fund. Billboards featuring Asha's photograph were erected along major highways throughout the southeast, ensuring that her face remained visible to thousands of travelers every day. The emotional toll on the Degree family was evident to everyone who interacted with them. Harold continued working to support his family, but colleagues noted that he seemed distracted and exhausted. Ikila struggled with the daily reality of not knowing whether her daughter was alive or dead, safe or suffering. O'Brien, who had lost not only his sister but also much of his parents' attention as they focused on the search, required counseling to help him cope with the trauma and confusion surrounding Asha's disappearance. Extended family members and close friends rallied around the Degrees, providing emotional support and practical assistance as the investigation continued. Church members organized prayer services and fundraising events, while neighbors helped maintain the family's home and yard during the long months when Harold and Ikila were consumed with search activities and media interviews. Spring arrived in North Carolina, bringing warmer weather and renewed hope that Asha might be found. Search teams were able to access areas that had been difficult to reach during the winter months, and new volunteer organizations joined the effort to locate the missing girl. Horseback riding groups, hiking clubs, and outdoor enthusiasts from across the region donated their time and expertise to search remote areas where a child might be hidden or where evidence might have been discarded. The case had become a cause célèbre throughout the Southeast, with radio stations regularly broadcasting Asha's description and television stations featuring her story during slow news periods. Missing person flyers were updated with new photographs and distributed to truck stops, rest areas, and travel centers along major interstate highways, based on the theory that someone involved in her disappearance might be traveling long distances. Investigators continued to pursue leads that took them to multiple states, following up on reported sightings and tips from people who believed they had seen Asha or someone matching her description. Each lead required careful investigation, often involving travel to distant locations and coordination with law enforcement agencies in other jurisdictions. While none of these leads produced concrete results, investigators could not afford to ignore any possibility that might lead to finding the missing girl. As the first anniversary of Asha's disappearance approached, the case remained as puzzling as it had been on the day she vanished. Despite thousands of hours of investigation, hundreds of interviews, and exhaustive searches of vast areas throughout North Carolina and neighboring states, No significant clues had emerged to explain what had happened to her after she was seen running into the woods along Highway 18. The anniversary brought renewed media attention and a fresh appeal from law enforcement for anyone with information to come forward. New investigative techniques were applied to existing evidence, and cold case specialists were brought in to review every aspect of the investigation with fresh eyes. The case had become one of the most high-profile unsolved disappearances in North Carolina history, and the pressure to find answers remained intense. Harold and Asha Degree marked the anniversary with a candlelight vigil attended by hundreds of community members who had supported the search for their daughter. "We're not giving up," Harold told the assembled crowd, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Somewhere out there, our daughter is waiting for us to find her, and we're going to keep looking until we do." But just when it seemed the case might remain forever unsolved, a discovery made during the summer of 2001 would breathe new life into the investigation and provide the most significant clue yet about what had happened to Asha Degree. On August 3, 2001, more than 18 months after Asha's disappearance, construction workers preparing a site for a new development along Highway 18 made a discovery that would electrify the investigation. Approximately 26 miles north of where Asha had been last seen, buried in a shallow depression and wrapped carefully in plastic bags, was her school backpack. The backpack was found by workers who were using heavy machinery to clear underbrush and prepare the ground for construction. The bright colors of the bag caught the attention of one of the workers, who initially thought it might be ordinary litter that had been discarded along the roadway. However, when he examined it more closely, he realized it appeared to have been deliberately buried and preserved. Cleveland County Sheriff's deputies were called to the scene immediately, and the area was secured as a potential crime scene. FBI evidence technicians were brought in to carefully excavate and document the discovery, treating every aspect of the find as potentially crucial evidence in solving Asha's disappearance. When the backpack was opened, investigators found Asha's name written on a piece of paper inside, along with her home phone number. The bag also contained school supplies, pencils, papers, and other items that her family confirmed had belonged to her. Most significantly, the backpack appeared to have been deliberately preserved, wrapped in 2 plastic garbage bags that had protected it from moisture and decomposition during the months it had been buried. The location of the discovery was particularly significant. The construction site was approximately 26 miles from where Asha had been seen on Highway 18, along the same road but much farther north toward the town of Morganton. This suggested that whoever had taken Asha had traveled a considerable distance before disposing of her belongings, and that they had taken care to preserve the backpack rather than simply discarding it. Forensic analysis of the backpack and its contents began immediately, with every item being tested for DNA evidence, fingerprints, and any other traces that might provide clues about who had handled it after Asha's disappearance. The plastic bags were examined for manufacturer information that might help trace their origin, and the soil around the burial site was analyzed for any evidence that might have been left by the person who buried the backpack. The discovery reinvigorated the investigation and brought national media attention back to Asha's case. Television news crews returned to Shelby to cover the new development, and law enforcement officials held press conferences to update the public on the significance of the find. The fact that the backpack had been preserved and buried rather than destroyed suggested that whoever had taken Asha might have kept it as some sort of trophy or memento. Criminal profiles were updated to reflect this new evidence, with experts suggesting that the careful preservation and burial of the backpack indicated a level of planning and organization that was consistent with someone who had experience with criminal activity. The location where it was found was analyzed to determine whether it might be connected to other crimes or whether the person responsible might have ties to the Morganton area. Local residents near the construction site were interviewed to determine whether anyone had noticed suspicious activity in the area during the months following Asha's disappearance. Several people reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles parked along rural roads near the site, but these reports covered such a long time period that it was difficult to determine which, if any, might be related to the burial of the backpack. The investigation expanded to include a thorough examination of the route between Shelby and Morganton, with particular attention paid to any locations along Highway 18 where someone might have held Asha or where other evidence might be found. Search teams were deployed to systematically examine the roadway and surrounding areas, looking for any additional items that might have been discarded or buried. Reward money for information about Asha's disappearance was increased significantly following the discovery of her backpack, and new billboards and flyers were created featuring updated information about the case. Law enforcement agencies throughout North Carolina and neighboring states were alerted to be on the lookout for any evidence or information that might be connected to the new developments. The discovery of the backpack also led to renewed interviews with potential suspects and witnesses who had been questioned during the initial investigation. People who lived or worked along the Highway 18 corridor between Shelby and Morganton were recontacted, and new background checks were conducted on individuals who had access to the area where the backpack was found. FBI behavioral analysts studied the case file extensively, developing new theories about the type of person who might have taken Asha and the circumstances that led to her disappearance. The fact that she had been seen walking voluntarily along the highway suggested that she had either been lured away by someone she trusted or had been convinced to leave home for reasons that seemed legitimate to her at the time. The preservation and burial of her backpack suggested that the perpetrator might have kept other items belonging to Asha, and investigators began focusing on identifying individuals who might have the psychological profile of someone who keeps trophies from their crimes. This type of behavior is often associated with serial offenders who derive psychological satisfaction from possessing mementos of their victims. Polygraph examinations were administered to numerous individuals connected to the case, including family members, neighbors, teachers, and anyone else who had regular contact with Asha before her disappearance. While polygraph results are not admissible in court, they can help investigators focus their attention on individuals who might be withholding information or involved in the crime. The case continued to generate national attention, with true crime television shows featuring Asha's story and documentary filmmakers exploring the mystery of her disappearance. Each new media presentation brought fresh tips and potential leads, though most proved to be false alarms or cases of mistaken identity. Online communities dedicated to missing persons cases adopted Asha's story, with amateur investigators analyzing every detail of the case and proposing new theories about what might have happened to her. While most of these amateur efforts did not produce viable leads, they helped keep public attention focused on the case and occasionally generated tips that warranted professional investigation. As 2002 progressed, the investigation continued with the same intensity that had characterized it from the beginning. Detective Joel Paget and his team pursued every lead, no matter how remote the possibility that it might provide answers about Asha's fate. The discovery of her backpack had provided new hope that the case could be solved, but it had also raised new questions about the identity and motives of whoever had taken her. The Degree family continued their tireless advocacy for their daughter, participating in media interviews, speaking at conferences about missing children, and working with law enforcement to keep the case in the public eye. Their dedication and courage in the face of unimaginable grief inspired countless people throughout the country and helped maintain pressure on investigators to continue pursuing every possible lead. Church congregations throughout the southeast continued to pray for Asha's safe return and for comfort for her family. Memorial services were held on significant dates, including her birthday and the anniversary of her disappearance, with hundreds of people gathering to show their support for the Degree family and their determination to find answers. The case had become a symbol of every parent's worst nightmare, but it had also demonstrated the power of community support and the determination of law enforcement to never give up on finding missing children. Asha's photograph remained prominently displayed in police stations, community centers, and churches throughout North Carolina, a constant reminder that somewhere a little girl was still missing and waiting to be found. Advanced forensic techniques were applied to all evidence in the case as technology improved, with scientists using new methods to analyze DNA samples, fiber evidence, and other materials that had been collected during the investigation. Each new technological advancement offered the possibility that previously unusable evidence might yield new clues about what had happened to Asha. International databases of missing children were searched for any cases that might be similar to Asha's disappearance, and law enforcement agencies in other countries were contacted to determine whether there might be connections to human trafficking or other criminal enterprises that might explain how a 9-year-old girl could vanish so completely. The emotional impact of the case extended far beyond the Degree family to include everyone who had participated in the search efforts or followed the story through media coverage. Volunteers who had spent countless hours searching for Asha found themselves permanently changed by the experience, many of them becoming advocates for missing children and victims' rights as a result of their involvement in the case. Law enforcement officers who worked on the investigation carried the weight of the unsolved case throughout their careers, with many of them continuing to pursue leads and review evidence even after retiring from active duty. The case had become a defining moment for the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office and other agencies involved, representing both their commitment to justice and the limitations of even the most thorough investigations. As the 5th anniversary of Asha's disappearance approached in 2005, the case remained one of the most high-profile unsolved missing persons cases in the United States. Age-progressed photographs showing what Asha might look like as a teenager were widely distributed, and new reward offers were announced to encourage anyone with information to come forward. Technology advances in internet communication and social media were beginning to change how missing persons cases were investigated and publicized. Websites dedicated to Asha's case were created, allowing for the rapid dissemination of information and providing platforms for people to share tips and theories about her disappearance. The Degree family had become reluctant experts on missing children cases, working with other families facing similar tragedies and advocating for improved investigation techniques and better coordination between law enforcement agencies. Their experience had taught them that the search for a missing child never truly ends, but rather evolves as new information and opportunities arise. Cold case specialists were assigned to review Asha's case periodically, bringing fresh perspectives and new techniques to bear on the evidence that had been collected over the years. These reviews occasionally generated new leads or suggested different approaches to existing evidence, though none had produced the breakthrough that everyone hoped would finally solve the mystery. The psychological impact of Asha's disappearance on her brother O'Brien had been carefully monitored by counselors and family support specialists throughout the years following her vanishing. As he grew older, he struggled with survivor's guilt and the burden of being the only witness to his sister's final night at home. His recollection of hearing her bed creak during the night remained one of the few clues about the timing of her departure. Community support for the Degree family remained strong throughout the years, with annual memorial services and fundraising events continuing to draw large crowds of supporters. Local businesses maintained missing person displays featuring Asha's photograph, and schools included her story and safety education programs designed to teach children about the dangers they might face. The case had influenced legislation related to missing children investigations and had contributed to improved coordination protocols between different law enforcement agencies. Asha's law, proposed by advocacy groups, would have required immediate activation of search resources for missing children, though various versions of such legislation faced challenges in different state legislatures. Media coverage of the case continued sporadically, with television documentaries and newspaper retrospectives appearing regularly to mark anniversaries or report on new developments. Each new story brought the possibility of reaching someone who might have crucial information about Asha's disappearance, and the family never declined an opportunity to keep her story in the public eye. As 2010 arrived, marking the 10th anniversary of Asha's disappearance, the case remained as mysterious as ever. The little girl who had walked out of her family's home on a stormy February night had become a symbol of all missing children, her face recognized by millions of people who continued to hope that someday, somehow, she would be found. Detective work on the case had become more sophisticated over the years, with computer databases, DNA analysis, and digital forensics providing new tools for investigators to use in pursuing leads. Cold case databases were regularly searched for similar crimes or patterns that might be connected to Asha's disappearance, and behavioral analysis techniques were continuously refined based on new understanding of criminal psychology. The reward money available for information leading to Asha's safe return or to the arrest and conviction of anyone responsible for her disappearance had grown to substantial amounts, funded by donations from individuals, businesses, and organizations throughout the country. Billboard campaigns and internet advertising kept her photograph visible to millions of people, ensuring that her case remained in the public consciousness. Law enforcement agencies throughout the Southeast maintained active files on Asha's case, with investigators continuing to follow up on tips and potential sightings that came in regularly. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had distributed millions of flyers featuring her photograph and description, making hers one of the most recognizable faces among missing children. Family advocacy work by Harold and Asha Degree had helped dozens of other families facing similar tragedies, providing them with guidance, emotional support, and practical advice about working with law enforcement and media during missing persons investigations. Their expertise, gained through the most painful experience imaginable, had become a resource for others walking the same difficult path. The community of Shelby had been permanently changed by Asha's disappearance, with parents becoming more protective of their children and neighborhoods, developing stronger watch programs and communication networks. Schools had implemented new safety protocols, and local law enforcement had expanded their community outreach programs to educate families about personal safety and crime prevention. Churches throughout the region continued to hold special services for Asha and other missing children, with congregations praying for their safe return and for comfort for their families. These spiritual communities had provided crucial emotional support for the Degree family throughout the long years of uncertainty and grief. Technology companies had begun using Asha's case as a test scenario for new missing persons databases and search algorithms, recognizing that advances in information processing and pattern recognition might eventually provide tools capable of solving cases that had previously seemed impossible to crack. The 15th anniversary of Asha's disappearance in 2015 brought renewed attention to the case, with investigators announcing that they were applying new forensic techniques to evidence that had been collected over the years. DNA analysis capabilities had improved dramatically since 2000, and materials that had previously been too degraded or limited for testing could now potentially yield useful results. Social media platforms had created new opportunities for spreading information about missing persons cases, with Asha's photograph and case details being shared thousands of times across Facebook, Twitter, and other networks. Online communities dedicated to true crime and missing persons cases had adopted her story, with amateur investigators conducting their own research and analysis. Age progression technology had also advanced significantly, allowing forensic artists to create more accurate representations of what Asha might look like as a young adult. These images were distributed widely, recognizing that after 15 years, she would no longer resemble the 9-year-old girl who had disappeared from her bedroom. International cooperation in missing persons cases had expanded, with law enforcement agencies sharing information across national borders and Interpol maintaining databases that could help identify connections between cases in different countries. While there was no evidence that Asha's case involved international elements, investigators remained open to all possibilities. The psychological profile of whoever had taken Asha had been refined over the years as criminal behavior analysis became more sophisticated. FBI profilers believed that the person responsible likely had local connections to the Shelby area and might have been someone who appeared trustworthy to children and their families. Victim advocacy organizations had used Asha's case to highlight the need for improved coordination between different agencies involved in missing persons investigations. Her disappearance had demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses of the existing system, leading to reforms in how such cases are handled. Educational programs in schools throughout North Carolina included Asha's story as part of safety curricula designed to teach children about personal safety without frightening them unnecessarily. Her case provided a real-world example of why safety rules exist and why children should never leave home alone, especially during nighttime hours. Memorial scholarships established in Asha's name had helped dozens of students pursue higher education, ensuring that her memory continued to have a positive impact on young people's lives. These scholarships were funded by community donations and fundraising events organized by people who had been touched by her story. The 20th anniversary in 2020 arrived during the COVID-19 pandemic, limiting the memorial events that would normally have marked such a significant milestone. However, virtual gatherings and online campaigns ensured that Asha's case remained in the public eye, with social media posts reaching millions of people worldwide. Advances in genetic genealogy had revolutionized cold case investigations by 2020, with DNA databases and family tree analysis providing new ways to identify suspects and victims in cases that had previously seemed unsolvable. Investigators in Asha's case began exploring whether these new techniques might provide fresh leads. Digital forensics capabilities had also expanded dramatically, with investigators able to analyze electronic evidence and communication records in ways that were impossible in 2000. While cell phone and internet usage were much less common when Asha disappeared, retroactive analysis of available digital records from that time period might still yield useful information. Behavioral analysis of similar cases had helped investigators understand patterns in child abduction cases, providing new insights into the type of person who might have been responsible for Asha's disappearance. Database searches for similar crimes continued to be performed regularly, looking for connections that might have been missed in earlier analyses. The Degree family's advocacy work had influenced legislation and policy changes related to missing children investigations at both state and federal levels. Their tireless efforts to keep Asha's case in the public eye had also helped maintain focus on dozens of other missing children cases throughout the country. Community support for the family remained strong after 20 years, with new generations of Shelby residents learning about Asha's story and joining the ongoing effort to find answers. Local schools continued to teach her story as part of safety education, ensuring that her case served as a continuing reminder of the importance of child protection. The emotional toll of the long investigation had been immense for everyone involved, from the family members who never stopped searching to the law enforcement officers who carried the case throughout their careers. Support services for families of missing persons had improved significantly since 2000, partly as a result of lessons learned from cases like Asha's. Technology continues to evolve, offering new possibilities for solving cold cases that have remained unsolved for decades. Artificial intelligence, improved DNA analysis, and enhanced database capabilities provide tools that investigators in 2000 could never have imagined. As we approach the 25th anniversary of Asha Degree's disappearance, her case remains one of the most perplexing and heartbreaking missing persons cases in American history. The 9-year-old girl who walked out of her home on a stormy February night continues to capture the public imagination and the dedication of investigators who refuse to give up hope that someday, somehow, the mystery will be solved. Recent developments in the case have provided new hope that answers may finally be within reach. In 2024, law enforcement officials announced that they had obtained search warrants related to the case and that they now believe Asha was the victim of homicide. While specific details of these new developments have not been released to the public, the announcement represents the most significant progress in the case in many years. The technological advances and investigative techniques available today offer possibilities that did not exist when Asha first disappeared. DNA analysis, genetic genealogy, digital forensics, and behavioral analysis have all evolved dramatically over the past 25 years, providing new tools for investigators to apply to cold cases. Social media and internet communication have transformed how missing persons cases are publicized and investigated, allowing for the rapid dissemination of information and creating new opportunities for witnesses and tipsters to come forward with crucial information. The community of Shelby and law enforcement agencies throughout North Carolina remain committed to finding answers about what happened to Asha Degree. Her photograph continues to appear on billboards, in police stations, and on missing persons websites, ensuring that her face remains familiar to millions of people who might hold the key to solving her case. Harold and Asha Degree have never stopped believing that their daughter will be found and that those responsible for her disappearance will be brought to justice. Their unwavering determination and advocacy work have inspired countless people and have helped improve the investigation and prevention of missing children cases throughout the United States. The mystery of Asha Degree's disappearance continues to challenge investigators, behavioral analysts, and amateur sleuths who study the details of her case, looking for clues that might have been overlooked. Her story has become a touchstone for discussions about child safety, family protection, and the importance of never giving up hope that missing loved ones can be found. Every February 14th, as the anniversary of her disappearance arrives, communities throughout the Southeast remember Asha Degree and renew their commitment to finding answers about what happened to her. Candlelight vigils, prayer services, and memorial events draw hundreds of people who refuse to let her story be forgotten. The little girl who loved basketball, Reading and going to church with her family represents all missing children and the families who search for them. Her case reminds us that behind every missing person poster and age-progressed photograph is a real person with dreams, fears, and people who love them unconditionally. Law enforcement officials continue to urge anyone with information about Asha's disappearance to come forward, no matter how much time has passed or how insignificant the information might seem. Tips that seemed unimportant years ago might now be the crucial piece of evidence needed to solve the case, especially when analyzed using modern investigative techniques. The reward money available for information leading to Asha's safe return or to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for her disappearance continues to grow, now totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. This substantial reward demonstrates the continuing commitment of the community and law enforcement to finding answers about her fate. Asha Degree would be 34 years old today if she is still alive. The age-progressed photographs created by forensic artists show what she might look like as an adult, though investigators now believe she was likely killed shortly after her disappearance. Still, her family and the community that has adopted her cause refuse to give up hope that someday the truth about what happened to her will finally be revealed. The investigation into Asha's disappearance represents one of the most extensive and long-running missing persons cases in North Carolina history. Thousands of tips have been investigated, hundreds of people have been interviewed, and countless hours have been spent searching for clues that might explain what happened to the 9-year-old girl who vanished into the darkness of a February storm. Her legacy extends far beyond the tragedy of her disappearance. Asha's case has influenced legislation, improved investigative techniques, strengthened community safety programs, and provided hope to other families facing similar tragedies. The little girl from Shelby has become a symbol of resilience, determination, and the power of communities to come together in the face of unimaginable loss. 25 years after she walked out of her family's home on Oakcrest Street, Asha Degree continues to inspire investigators, advocates, and ordinary citizens who believe that every missing person deserves to be found and that every family deserves answers. Her story reminds us that the search for truth and justice never ends, and that somewhere, someone knows what happened to the little girl who disappeared into the night. The mystery may remain unsolved, but the determination to find answers burns as brightly today as it did on that February morning in 2000, when Asha Degree discovered her daughter's empty bed. Asha's story is far from over, and the hope remains that someday, somehow, the truth will finally emerge from the darkness that has shrouded her disappearance for more than 2 decades. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the world is still and possibilities seem endless, Asha Degree remains somewhere in the hearts and minds of thousands of people who refuse to forget her story. The 9-year-old girl who loved basketball and dreamed of bright futures continues to touch lives and inspire hope that even the most challenging mysteries can eventually be solved. Her name is spoken in police stations and community centers, written on missing person flyers and internet forums, remembered in prayers and quiet moments of reflection. Asha Degree may have vanished from sight, but she has never disappeared from the collective memory of a community that refuses to give up hope that someday justice will prevail and answers will finally come.